Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, you've all heard me speak quite a few times, so you have to suck it up one last time. Mr. Speaker, to you and all my fellow representatives, I wish to extend my warmest and most heartfelt affinity. You all hold a really special place in my heart. It is a love that comes not just from our shared time and experience here, but also from my sincere caring for you and for your future. One of my favorite Sunday school songs, and you all know I love to sing, is Be a Missionary. The song taught me that wherever I am, town, country, busy avenue, wherever I am, I'm to be God's emissary, his own emissary. And I'm so thankful to God for the opportunity I had to serve here and to serve him. Whether it was in speeches or prayers, committees, Bible study, bill drafting, hymn singing, dinner conversation. I have wanted to live in a way that glorified God, told you about Jesus' work in my heart, and fulfilled my morning prayer each day that I would follow Colossians 3:17. In all you do, work with all your heart as working for the Lord. I know I was never perfect at this, and there are clearly times that I didn't represent my Lord very well, and I pray your forgiveness for those times. Speaking of forgiveness, I'm going to offer you my apology now if the remainder of my speech steps heavily on your toes. You see, it's tempting for me to just walk out of this place with laughter at the wonderful times that I had with all of you, and those were often. It's tempting to simply share the awful poignancy and the heartbreak of losing Representative Battaglia and Representative Plawecki, which is still raw and heartbreaking. And it's tempting to simply wax eloquent only in thanks and gratitude to family, staff, colleagues, for which I'm overflowing. Yes, all of these have been a part of many fine speeches, and mine could follow in similitude to a kind and even sincere ovation and accolades. But, as it seems I've never been quite normal in this chamber, I have bored and exasperated many of you with my speeches and verbosity. Rep. Battaglia was a frequent critic that I was stealing his overtime. And I believe in the power of words. I believe in persuasion and that all speaking should flow with a purpose to an end. As a child, I was always told that I talked too much and that I'd be a lawyer someday or a politician. But speaking is how we ought to communicate, and our founders and the generations that have followed used speech to a mighty end. Now it's diminished in many circles, even here, to sound bites, quips. It's become an end unto itself, with purpose only to be heard and not to persuade, not to promote discourse or share one's own viewpoint as an invitation to receive and provide input, insight, and illumination. When I spoke to the expulsion of two of our members, I shared with you from my heart my passion for the foundations of this institution. I shared with you the noble vision our founders and forebears had and kept alive to see men govern themselves in these hallowed halls. And I've attempted to communicate the solemnity of our duties and our oaths and a necessary commitment to truth. Now, in my last moments of elocution with you, I feel I must share my observations about the terrible ways this body falls far short of the glory and honor it ought to aspire. You see, I'm a dreamer of sorts, but most call me naive. I came to this place challenged by my faith to not live for men's praise, but for God's. And having spent a great deal of time understanding the founding of our nation and state, its principles of inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I was anxious to serve here, anxious to preserve those. I was anxious to promote justice and liberty and righteousness and the worth of each person, freedom of conscience, and worship. I girded myself up for the fight against those who believe in ideas that I feel are antithetical to the continuation of those ideals. But what I was not prepared for was the corporate lack of focus and passion I found to pursue these values. While nearly every member believes in these things and ascribes to our common heritage, the sad truth is that we are normally too busy with the lower work than to ascend to the high. We can fight all day for pensions for a group, or a new curriculum, or gun rights, or choice, or tax changes, or pigs, or banning monkeys, or building roads. There's nothing wrong with debate on any of those things. But where we break down is in failing to fight the injustices our own government precipitates when they are counter to the issues that also have a claim on us. Let me speak plainly so that my point is not lost in my love for words. When will we work together to fight injustice of our own laws, that our own laws and government create? For example, when I first came here, the DNR had created a power struggle with the legislature over pigs. They demanded, or dared, that the legislature must act, or they'd act for us. They further dictated how our actions should look. When Kevin Daly and Sharon Tyler and myself refused to accept their way without compromise and sense, the department proceeded to work against us by going to other stakeholders and opposition groups. Ultimately, the department held the upper hand and dictated to this body and to this legislature how it should write laws rather than the other way around. And by the way, just for a little break in the seriousness, this is why I gave you these pigs today. I bought these 6 years ago to give out as gifts when I thought we'd emerge victorious from the fight with the department, and they've sat in my office for 6 years. I'm sorry, some of the elastic isn't so good on some of them anymore. And if you haven't figured out, if you pull out the little tag, it'll oink for you. So, why does this matter? Because a great injustice came from our failure to corporately repudiate the department. People had their lawful property destroyed or confiscated, and their livelihoods and dreams ended without just compensation or due process. This was further exacerbated by interest groups that were more interested in protectionism than in maintaining our fundamental beliefs of freedom and private property. And while I don't for a moment believe any of us seeks this job or comes every day with the intention to do other than our conscience dictates, it is also clear to me that the influence of influence is undeniable. I watched in amazement in the first months of my service in 2011 to see a massive update to the Telecom Act pass. Not that that was all bad. But I remember being shocked to see so many people of a particular political persuasion voting for it too. And when I approached my good friend, Representative Steve Lindbergh, to ask what was going on, he taught me a very valuable lesson. That's when I first learned that influence is not done as is so often envisioned or portrayed in movies and books. Instead, it sneaks up on us all through the making of the agendas and the control of the information of those who are in power. Leadership, not the quality, but the positions in this chamber have become too powerful on both sides of the aisle. The stakes of the game have become too high. This is played out in practices of choreographing the minute details of our sessions, the predetermining of who will speak, what they'll say, what amendments get to succeed, and which ones fail. This is a problem we've all inherited. We didn't create this problem, but still, we should work against these practices. We have abandoned the beauty of an unpredictable process because it's too chancy, it's too messy. Heaven forbid we let a member make and win his case for an amendment because it might jeopardize some other member who's unable to explain his vote against some political talking point or mailer. Heaven forbid we're forced to turn down good ideas we cannot afford or accept one at the expense of some other person's preferred project. Worst is keeping good ideas from receiving a vote because leadership has found it easier to work its own chamber rather than the other one? Are we really too afraid of negotiating in good faith that we entrap our own colleagues, even our own party, by doing omnibus bills that blend so many issues together that's impossible, particularly for the inexperienced, to object without endangering what they've been informed they must attain by political gurus who are telling them how vital their reelection is? Most dramatic to this show is our disregard for the obvious. While issues like immediate effect and the following of proper order might seem blasé, they speak to our willingness to accept the farce and sophistries that occur. Seriously, we don't know how to count 1/5 of the votes? To my everlasting shame, I voted for that travesty in my first term. If we do not stoop to follow the mundane when it's apparently irrelevant, we will only diminish the constitutional protections from abuse when the issues are paramount. And I haven't forgotten how I was betrayed by those who had protested that farce so vigorously when I got a chance to have a vote to fix it. And I've forgiven them, but it was hard. It was, some even articulated that even though they protested so vociferously that it happened, that they honestly believed that the abuse of power was important in case they got back into the majority at another time. None of this is new. It's politics. There have been abuses in politics and government for millennia. It's a natural outflow of our human nature, because we're not as good as we think we are down here. I know what kind of rot's in my own heart. But until all men are angels, and we don't need laws, what can we do? I recommend that we refuse to compromise on following the Constitution. I recommend that we do not allow fear of the uncertainty of the process to manipulate us into acquiescing to abusing power. I recommend that we do not forget the people give the power to the legislature to serve them. I recommend that we approach these issues like flint without fear, but with commitment, and not neuter our own chamber by faulty agreements making us less than co-equal partners in such efforts. I recommend we grow some courage to remind the governor that we make policy, and it doesn't have to take 56, 20, and 1. There's a way to get around that extra 1 on the end. Most of all, if you want to fix to diminish the power of leadership, we must stop allowing them to monopolize the money they use to buy our support, and we must reform term limits. Clearly, the extreme shortness of Michigan term limits is diminishing the abilities of this chamber. It makes a few chosen the kings and power pieces, while the rest are relegated to pawns. It keeps the pawns in check rather than the king. By removing the security time provides to challenge the king, to challenge the powers. Our citizens, beyond that, don't have the opportunity to be properly represented by members who have full opportunities to develop their skills and have them realized during their service because it's unnaturally cut short. And we, as members, fall victim to unchallenged power and a lack of empathy for those with differing views as minority and majority become limited situational realities rather than common possibilities. So, after all of that, I don't necessarily expect you to applaud. You won't hurt my feelings. As I said at the beginning, I care about each of you very much, and I don't hold any resentment. I apologize for stepping on toes, and I don't point any fingers without acknowledging them pointing back at me. But I care too much for what we should be. I care too much for what we should be, to go without challenging those following to do better. It is time to step up and restore proper order. It is time to honor each other by not controlling the process with an iron fist, but to let it flow as it should. Build trust again. I implore the coming leadership to have the courage to restore the beauty and honesty of unedited debate, along with honest voting on motions. You would see that we can survive doing it right. The locals do. Other bodies around the country do. I've been to some of them. The Senate does. And we used to. And we can again. You see, it came home to me when I went to the funeral of my first opponent, Representative Judy Narrett. There I saw that she was someone's mother, someone's grandmother, someone's daughter. I never got to know her beyond being an opponent. What a tragedy. The lesson continued as I looked at who have been my friends here, the ones I spent time with and got to know. For example, Representatives Hovey Wright and Rutledge and Talabi. We all disagree on so much, especially me and Representative Wright. But we sat by each other in orientation. And somehow we've always managed to remain friends because we got to know each other. Rep. Italia, he was my first friend here in Lansing. I met him even before we were elected. I barely knew Kevin Daly when his son was lost, but yet I was there and shared with him as a brother in dairy farming and in the legislature. And it took some time, but I even came to trust Bill Zagman despite his stalwart work against me on the pig issue, because I got to know he wasn't just the issue. He's a person. It all comes back to loving our neighbor as ourselves. That belief does not end when we walk into this room, and it's not going to end for me when I leave. Thank you to my very special members of my oversight committee. It has been my honor to be your chair. And Representative Robinson, you are a person that I wish I could be as honest as you are, and I thank you so much for that. And Patty Pluta, thanks for being there in the committee, and Hassan, and Andrew, and Rebecca, and now Dave Greco. Thanks to all my music partners over the years. So many of you have joined me at the piano, and I thank you for that. It's been a real honor to spend that time with you and to use music to bind us together. I'd be very remiss not to recognize my tremendous appreciation of the staff, the clerks. Rich, thanks for making the UP proud. Gary, thanks for answering my many questions about procedure and history. Thank you to all the Capitol staff, especially those who love the history of this building. Thank you to the maintenance folk who even took time to take care of me and fix the piano bench a couple of times. Thank you to Speaker Cotter, who took a chance on someone most thought was too much of a loose cannon, and if you haven't, now you probably think so too. Chairing Oversight and Ethics has been, and one of the other special committees that doesn't exist anymore, so I won't mention it, but has been an enormous honor to me, and thank you. Thank you to my excellent staff over the years, Emily, Carly, Kara, Katie, Nathan, Marilyn, and even Dan, but especially to Paul Burns. Been with me since day one. God truly worked in an amazing way to bring us together, and you've been not just a great help with the work, but a friend and a confidant. And you've been the one I can lean on to know whether I'm staying true and consistent to my values. Thanks to Tom Casperson, my friend, mentor, brother in Christ. I'll miss all of the time we got to spend together. I'll never be able to repay your kindness. Thank you to all the sergeants, but especially to Chief Dixon. You saw me at my lowest points, Chief, when this place had crushed me again and again. Chief, God used you in those moments in only a way another believer who's been crushed could be used. Thank you. And Joy Brewer, you did the same for me often, but particularly when I was so depressed in April of my first year, and you reminded me that I'd made a commitment to God not to worry about the consequences of my reelection in doing what was right, even when it's hard. And Rebecca Park, you always put me in my place when you reminded me that whatever was going on, it wasn't all about me. Thank you for keeping my boots grounded in the crap that really matters, literally and figuratively. God, family, and my farm. You're all most welcome in the UP, except Ken Yonker. You have to have your green card. Come on up for the state fair, or Pictured Rocks, or the Copper Dog, or come see the Big John Iron Mine in Vulcan. And stop by the McBroom farm. I'll introduce you to the cows, and along with my wonderful family who gave me the chance to be here. Sarah, Helen, Eddie, Esther, Kenny Jack, and one unknown yet. We haven't even figured out what the name is, and we don't know if it's a boy or girl, and it could be any moment. But should be there by the time you get there. So may God richly bless you, and Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Representative McBroom.